In the quiet town of Briarwood, people talked about an old, forgotten graveyard. They said strange things happened there, and children dared each other to go near it, but no one talked about the dancing girl without feeling scared. One misty evening, just as the sun set, a young woman named Eliza decided to visit the graveyard. She was new to the town and didn't know its dark history. She wanted to explore. As she walked through the iron gates, she felt a chill, but thought it was just the evening coolness. The graveyard was overgrown with ivy and wildflowers. The gravestones were old and worn, standing silently in the dim light. Eliza felt a strong urge to go to the center of the graveyard. She followed a narrow, winding path that led her deeper inside. As night fell, the full moon came out from behind the clouds, lighting up the tombstones. Eliza's footsteps echoed in the silence, and she felt like she was being watched. She turned a corner and stopped. In the center of a clearing was an old stone mausoleum. Eliza felt compelled to go to the mausoleum. Its door was ajar and rusted, creaking as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and cold, with a faint smell of decay. In the center of the room, an old music box sat on a pedestal. It was beautifully designed, with engravings of dancers and flowers. Curiosity got the better of her, and Eliza touched the music box. As soon as she did, the lid sprang open, and a haunting melody began to play. The tune was beautiful yet sad, filling the small space with an eerie sound. Suddenly, the ground started to tremble. Eliza stumbled back, her heart racing. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a young girl in a tattered white dress, her long hair flowing. Her eyes were empty, and her expression was blank, but she moved gracefully. The girl began to dance, her movements smooth and mesmerizing. Eliza watched, unable to look away, as the girl twirled and spun around the mausoleum. The music box kept playing, holding Eliza captive. She noticed that the girl's feet never touched the ground. She floated, her movements becoming more frantic and desperate. Eliza tried to move, but she couldn't. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened. The girl's dance became wilder, and Eliza saw the pain in her hollow eyes. It was like the dance was a cry for help, a plea for release from an eternal torment. Eliza remembered the stories she had heard. They spoke of a girl named Annabelle, who disappeared over a century ago. She was a talented dancer, loved by everyone, but she vanished on the night of her final performance. Some said she was cursed. Others believed the spirits of the graveyard took her. Eliza realized that Annabelle was trapped in an endless dance, bound to the music box. Determined to free her, Eliza gathered all her strength and reached out to close the lid. A searing pain shot through her arm, but she pushed harder. With a final effort, Eliza slammed the lid shut. The music stopped and the girl's dance ended. Annabelle's eyes met Eliza's, filled with gratitude. Then she faded into the shadows. Eliza collapsed, gasping for breath. The mausoleum was silent, and the cold had lifted. She knew she had freed Annabelle. As she left the graveyard, the first light of dawn breaking, she felt peace. From that day on, the graveyard stayed quiet, and the whispers of the dancing girl faded. Eliza never spoke of her experience, but she knew she had witnessed something extraordinary. The tale of the dancing girl in the graveyard became a legend in Briarwood, reminding everyone of the power of compassion and the strength of the human spirit. In the quiet village of Ravenswood, there was an old cemetery just outside of town. Covered in ivy and hidden by ancient trees, it was a place the villagers avoided. They whispered about strange events and an old lady who haunted the cemetery. One autumn evening, a young man named Tom, new to the village, decided to explore the cemetery. He was curious about the local legends and wanted to find out the truth. As the sun set, Tom set out with a flashlight and a sense of adventure. The cemetery entrance had a rusty old gate that creaked loudly when Tom pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder and the place was silent. Tombstones, old and worn, stuck out from the ground like jagged teeth. Tom's footsteps echoed on the gravel path as he walked deeper into the cemetery. Tom felt like someone was watching him. He looked around but saw only shadows and old gravestones. Determined to continue, he followed the path until he found a large crumbling mausoleum. The stone building was covered in moss and ivy, and the door was slightly open. Tom paused, then pushed the door open and went inside. The air was damp and smelled of decay. In the center, an old, dusty coffin lay on a stone pedestal. Tom shone his flashlight on it. Suddenly, soft whispers filled the air. Tom turned around, but saw only shadows. The whispers grew louder and seemed to come from all directions. Scared, Tom backed away from the coffin, the whispers turning into a chorus of eerie voices. As he reached the door, the whispers stopped. Silence fell, heavy and thick. Tom took a deep breath and stepped outside. The cemetery seemed darker now, with the moonlight barely reaching through the trees. As he walked back to the gate, Tom saw a figure in the distance. It was an old lady in a long, tattered black dress. Her white hair flowed around her face, and her eyes glowed unnaturally. She stood still, watching him. Tom's heart raced. He tried to call out, but no sound came. The old lady started moving towards him, slowly. Tom turned and ran, his flashlight bouncing wildly. He could hear her footsteps behind him, getting closer. Panicked, he sprinted to the gate. He reached it, but it was closed and locked. Desperately, he shook the gate, but it wouldn't move. He turned to face the old lady, now just a few feet away. Her eyes, filled with a malevolent intelligence, locked onto his. She raised a gnarled hand and pointed at him, her lips moving without sound. Tom felt a cold dread wash over him, freezing him in place. The old lady's mouth opened, and an eerie voice filled the air. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her voice echoing. "This place is not for the living." Tom tried to speak, but no sound came out. The old lady kept approaching, her hand still outstretched. Tom felt a cold, invisible force wrap around him, tightening like a vice. He struggled, but it felt like the air had turned to iron. "You must leave," the old lady whispered, her voice soft but menacing. "Leave and never return." With a final effort, Tom broke free and ran through the cemetery. He raced past the tombstones and trees, his heart pounding. He didn't stop until he was back in the village, under the safety of the streetlights. Breathless and terrified, Tom looked back towards the cemetery. In the distance, he could see the outline of the old lady at the gate, watching him. He knew then that the stories were true, and the cemetery was a place of dark, ancient power. Tom never spoke of what he saw that night, and he never returned to the cemetery. The villagers noticed a change in him, a haunted look in his eyes, and they knew he had encountered the old lady. From that day on, Tom lived with the memory of the old lady in the cemetery, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead.